Jeremy, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too.
How's the training camp been so far? I mean, you passed on the first camp, but you flew in a few days ago for this one?
Yeah, lots of work to be done before heading over. So I let the kind of, let's say, football-focused staff just get on with the camp and get everything started. So Jose getting his first training sessions under his belt, and Mika obviously doing his presentations about how he sees things. So there was no need for me to be here in the first week or so. But yeah, joining the camp now, and everything's really, really positive. Yeah.
What are your first impressions of Jose now that you get the chance to spend some time with him?
Very similar to during the interview process, which is really great. Obviously, you don't want to appoint someone and then find that their character completely changes in the environment, which I have heard about in the past with different clubs where they appoint someone they thought they were going to be something and they end up being something different. He's really consistent. He's measured. He's analytical. He's not a kind of shouter and screamer. He wants to kind of give his information very, very clearly, but in a way wants to kind of give a little bit of space.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be interpreted in the right way, and players and staff actually can kind of, take more responsibility and be motivated to do things themselves. So it's been really good.
The strongest impression he left on me when I had him on the podcast was just how present he was, how composed he was, how thoughtful he was about every single answer, really wanted to give it thought.
Yeah.
He never just used the cliche answers. Like, he actually cared about the content of what he was trying to communicate, even with me. So I can imagine you get the same impression around the rest of the people around the club.
Yeah, I think that's what set him apart actually during the process, was that there are lots of coaches that can convey their playing style, their game model, all this kind of stuff. But we were looking for a character as well, someone who could be, what's the word? Kind of empathetic, that you can kind of get the good feeling for, and that they're open with you rather than just it's a presentation.
Yep.
And we had a few really talented coaches that we spoke with who were excellent at presentation, really polished. But at the same time, you never got a feeling of who they were. With Jose, there was that combination right from the start. You could kind of get a feeling of, okay, he's open, he wants to tell you more, he wants to invite you in, he wants to tell you about things, the way he sees the world. But at the same time, he's not going to push back if you have other ideas or you want to collaborate in a different way. So yeah, that was the real positive, is getting a coach who can really take us forward as a club onto a kind of another level.
Do you see any similarities with his personality when you compare to maybe coaches that have become really successful in life? You've worked for some of the bigger clubs and organizations in the world. Do you see patterns in him that you see in coaches that...
That's an interesting question. Not really. I think every coach has their differences, right? I mean, there are some clubs I worked at where, I was mentioning it to someone else the other day, it was a long time ago now, but I worked for Barnet Football Club when Martin Allen was the coach. And I don't know if any of your listeners will know of Martin Allen, but his nickname was Mad Dog.
Yeah.
This guy was crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, the stories, you can go on YouTube and just type in Mad Dog Martin Allen and you'll just be laughing for hours. Every single player has a story about him. But he was effective. Like, he was appointed basically most of the time to save teams from relegation, to make an immediate impact.
Yeah.
And he did. He was really successful at doing that. And then you find, other coaches. So, for example, at West Ham, worked under Slaven Bilic for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Really relaxed guy, funny.
Incredible coach.
Yeah, good sense of humor, but very knowledgeable, knows his stuff. Always off. We actually West Ham set up a smoking room for him. So he was smoking on site, but they said you can't do it in the normal buildings. They set up an entire room for him to go and smoke. Different characters, different kind of styles, different approaches. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a kind of similarity with the ones who have done well, but at the same time, you can see that there are characteristics of Jose that would lead to something successful.
I imagine the kind of more of a hothead kind of energy injection kind of coach like you're talking about, they usually work for a limited period of time and then they don't build something that gets stronger over time. Whereas the more empathetic leadership, the trust building relationship is something that can progress incrementally.
And I think that's also something that we were considering, is that when you have, like you say, when you have that high energy kind of approach, players will take that on board immediately. Yeah. But after a while, we'll kind of run out of energy to deal with it.
Yeah.
And either they'll push back or they'll maybe stop listening, or, it's not always the case, but, you see coaches like, Jose Riveiro is a good example. I mean, how often does he stay at a club longer than kind of 2 years?
No.
And so and even him, he's not unbelievably high energy. He's not crazy, but at the same time, there's that kind of level of intensity. So we were looking for a long-term coach. We want a coach here to build over time, who has we would have the patience and that has the patience to do it. And so, yeah, I think with his demeanor, I think José's a really good fit for that.
I heard from Felix Söderberg when he joined the other week on the podcast. He said that he was the number one choice. It just took some time because he needed to give it some thought because of what he went through in Egypt, and which was kind of like quick and abrupt. And
yeah, it was actually a little bit more than that, because I can take you through the process if you like. It was quite a long kind of process for a number of reasons. So I think I've mentioned this before in the media, is that we do kind of a succession planning process. So with the data, we're able to kind of scout the world. We know exactly the criteria that we're looking for in terms of filtering. And some of that's technical, tactical, some of it's to do with player development, some of it's to do with kind of player sales, driving, transfers, this kind of stuff. But there's a way for us to get down to a manageable group of coaches. And of course, there's the realism. So if a coach is coaching in the Premier League, we're not taking that coach. If he's in Saudi, there's no way we're buying him out of his contract. So we end up with kind of lists of, let's say, 20 to 25 coaches, and that's always there. So that list gets given to Fredrik Söderberg. He has that in his back pocket. That gets updated around about every 8 weeks. So we always have a list of coaches that we know fit our criteria. The next phase, obviously, in kind of late November November, December, we obviously knew that there was action to be taken. So we already knew the general direction we were going and which coaches were there. And then obviously that being updated regularly, we then thought, okay, we now need to move. We now need to start to speak to coaches and try and find out availability. At that stage, we started a process of meeting the coaches directly. Then we had second meetings on video. Then we had third meetings. And then the thing that we got down to was a kind of manageable number. Can't remember how many it was, but 5, 6 coaches. And at that stage, we knew we had to wait because Mika needed to be appointed. And we didn't want to move any further without having the input of the person that was going to be line managing, working with, supporting that coach. So it didn't make any sense for us to continue there. So we had a little bit of a delay waiting for Mika to come on board. As soon as Mika was on board, he immediately got stuck into the reports, our feedback about the coaches that we liked and why they were in the final group, how they fitted into the way that the club wanted to work. And then he brought a few ideas and a few names as well, and we had to take them through the same process. So they had to have an in-person meeting, a video call, etc., etc. So there was a little bit of a delay there as well. Then we finally get to the position where we're looking to make the final selection. And when we went for José, there was, as Fredrik said, there was a little bit of a time period there where he wanted to be sure that it was the right move for him. As you say, that was, I guess maybe traumatic's the wrong word, but it wasn't a nice experience at Al Ahly, and he wanted to know that this was going to be it. This was going to be the project he was really going to dive into for the next, 3 years in his contract, but hopefully longer. So yeah, you can see there that the process was really quite lengthened, but at the same time, you might miss 2 weeks of pre-season doing that, but this is a 3-year appointment. So,
and one of the most crucial appointments for a football team.
Yeah. Exactly, the main one, really, the one that's going to impact the most, probably. So I think for us, it was a case of, okay, we missed 2 weeks, but we get it right, or we rush this and we regret it later. So yeah, for us, it was the right thing to do, to wait for Mika to have everyone on board, and I think everyone agreed, right from the off. I think me and Fredrik we were already there. We already knew who our number one was, and then obviously we had to wait for Mika. And what was nice was, it was unanimous from the moment that we went through that. So Mika brought his ideas and brought in a couple of candidates, but I think he'd already realised as well that actually that's the one for me. And then he came around to the same decision independently, and that was it. So it was good.
When you mentioned the multiple meetings or rounds of interviews or whatever you want to call it, is there a sequence to it where the first one is more the coach presenting them and then the club presents itself later? Who's selling who at the different stages? That's
something that we really wanted to be clear on. The first contact or the first meeting, most of them were in person, was us presenting. We wanted to be very clear that we know who we are. We know what we're looking for in a coach. We know what we're looking for from an organizational perspective, and all the things that we kind of talk about in terms of the strategy, in terms of we need to be, every club, to be fair, in our Svenskan needs to be, but we need to be a club that develops players. We need to build assets. We need to be able to sell, to build our equity, to do these things. And I'm sure we'll come back to that later, but these are the things that need to be done. You can't be a coach. I mean, okay, going back to my old club, Paphos, for example, I looked at the team that was playing in the Champions League the other day. There's not a single player that was in the starting 11 under the age of 28. We can't do that here. We can't. If we do that for multiple seasons and we don't sell, there's no rich owner going to come out of nowhere and give us the cash to fill the gap. We have to do that ourselves. So for me, doing that presentation and making it very clear to the coaches who we are and what we'd expect was stage one. Because if a coach isn't aligned with that, we might as well stop the process there. So for us, it was presenting AIK, presenting our processes, who we are as a club, our culture, our history, these kind of things. And then the second part was, okay, let's get an idea of you. So that was the first meeting, which obviously, you know, if you split it 50-50, let's say, you don't get to find out that much about the person, which is where Frederick was really kind of interested in José and wanted, and also where a few coaches kind of got knocked out of the situation where he was like, you'd expect to at least feel something a little bit with a coach. And if it was too polished, too presentational, he was like, I didn't feel it. I'd rather go with the coaches that I can feel something from. And then you get both sides. So you know they're aligned. You know they've got a game model, or they've been able to explain these things, and they have the character. That was kind of meeting number one. Was if a coach could get through those, we were happy to move to stage two. And then stage two really started to delve into the detail. That was much more about them. We kind of handed that over to them, list of questions, you know, to really delve into who they are.
Because it is an interesting dynamic, right? It is a question of who's selling who. Sometimes you try to get a player or a coach or whatever where he might have unlimited amounts of options and you got to convince him that this is the right project. Whereas sometimes the coach is really trying to reach to get that job and is maybe the less qualified candidate. So did you have candidates where you felt that some of them were more senior and experienced and you had to pull, and in other occasions there were candidates that really would be dying to get this kind of job?
I'm trying to think back through the meetings. There were a few that had kind of question marks about, you know, what can we do for them?
Okay.
Those ones felt a bit awkward, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, how can we help your career? And it's like, well, it kind of felt that way. Obviously that wasn't the conversation, but it felt that way. With the majority of the coaches, I think what we were trying to get from them is an explanation of whether their ideas fit with ours. Because, like you say, let's say someone comes to you and presents their way of doing things, and you go, oh, that's a really good way of doing things. I like him, let's do that. That's where your strategy goes off in different directions. And it's like, let's say, for example, a coach arrived and said, oh, I want to play really, I don't know, direct football, or I want to play total tiki-taka, 70% possession, slow build up. This is what I want to do. And we were like, oh, wow, actually, his presentation was really great. Maybe we should do that. That wouldn't work for what we're trying to do. We have our strategy in place. We have what we're looking for in a coach. And as a good example, the final 5 candidates that when Mika arrived, that we had left, all of them, and I think I've done this presentation a couple of times, and people will have seen the slide about how close we were to achieving the kind of ideal style of play.
Yeah, the 78%.
Yeah, which actually went down quite a lot by the end of the season. It was down to about 68 or something. So it actually, in that final few weeks of the season, really kind of that impacted quite heavily. But anyway, the candidates that were part of that final process all had shown evidence in one club or another that they could be right in the middle of what we were looking for.
Oh, really?
So there were a couple of coaches where it's quite obvious, and some of the coaches, it's been leaked that, you know, about who we met and who was on our list. Some of them are miles away, by the way, which I thought was quite funny. There's a few candidates like, oh, we've, you know, hey, okay, I've spoken to this person, he's high on the shortlist. I was thinking, not even made contact, not spoken to them at all. But anyway, but for some of them, especially those last 5, all of them at one club or more were in the middle of that kind of zone. And so they'd shown evidence of doing it before. And that's what we needed. We either needed to be really confident they could get there, or to have done it before and to be able to say, actually, that coach has delivered the style of play we're looking for before.
Because much like player data, the context matters, right? Because there can be coaches that have done it in one club and then they join a club that is fighting to avoid relegation,
Yes.
and now they can't do it.
Exactly, and that's why it's that kind of potential side. So either they needed to have been to shown they'd done it before, or they needed to have shown potential that they could reach there, and there's a reason why it's not quite there. But as it happened, the 5 coaches that were kind of left at the end had all done it. And so in different contexts. So you're like, okay, that's interesting. So they've done it when they were in that club, and they've done it when they're in that club. And that was a kind of medium-sized club that did quite well, or that was a big club that you'd expect to be kind of around there. So to me, it was really, really interesting to kind of mix that data with then the explanation of their kind of game models. There were some coaches that were really quite extreme in their game models, and it was like, we will be doing this, and this is how it looks on the pitch, and showing you, and you're like, okay, that's pretty cool, and it is there reflected in the data. And there were others where it was kind of more about, I can adjust, I can be flexible depending on the team I'm with, but here's my general game model, here's how I generally see things. So different approaches, but yeah, it was all within the way that we saw the criteria.
One of the more fascinating things about the assignment that Jose has been given now is the fact that he's going to try to build something gradually over time in a huge club, in the Swedish league at least, that traditionally has had limited patience, and he probably needs to find the right balance between showing at least some kind of evidence along the way that we're heading in the right direction, but down the line needs to deliver results. But to do what he needs to do in the context that he's going to do it, that's got to be pretty rare, because the big clubs usually optimize for results. There are few big clubs, like maybe Hamburg or Schalke would be teams like, okay, we need to build something sustainable over time.
Yeah.
Did you look at coaches that had taken on those kind of tasks before?
Yes, and I think we kind of explained, let's say, the Swedish context, but there's also the AIK context within that, right? We're a team that can't just develop players to build our equity, to have a long-term sustainability. We have to challenge as well. Now, the question is whether that challenging needs to happen immediately from day one, or whether that can progress over time. I think with a club like us, we always need to be somewhere close. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but at the same time, as a club, we have to go this direction. So it's not just the head coach kind of saying, well, give me some time and I can build this. The whole club needs to be doing the exact same thing. So yeah, all the coaches that we spoke with, and Jose, I'm sure, obviously, when you've spoken to him, you can kind of go into his background about developing players, and you can see that at Orlando. So Pirates is a really good example, whereby he took over the team when I think they were 7th or 8th. Big club. You'd expect them to be challenging for titles. Yeah, I mean,
gigantic club.
Getting 100,000 fans to derbies is always fun.
Yeah.
But obviously hadn't really, they won the African Champions League, I think, back in the 90s, but hadn't really competed at that level for a while either. So a little bit similar to us, really. We want to be back playing in Europe regularly. We want to be challenging, but it takes a little bit of time to get there. And so obviously he had immediate success winning cups. So that got him that kind of, what should we say?
The accolades of being a winning coach.
Yeah, exactly. So there's less questions about, okay, this guy's going to be developing us over time. But he didn't win the league.
Yeah.
So, but got them higher, ended up second place the next year, carried on winning the cups, qualified for Champions League again, and then got them to the semi-finals of the Champions League. So now they're, from going from a team that's not in continental competition, 7th or 8th in the league, not competing, to building that up. But interestingly, building it up with the star players in the team being these young talents. And that's the bit that we looked at and felt, okay, there's a process that Jose goes through, and he's comfortable doing this. It's not going to have to be forced on him. We don't have to say, look, you need to play these young players. He's going to do it naturally anyway, because that's how he works. So for us, that was a really good match. And there were a few other coaches on the list that had similar kind of profiles. So we would have been comfortable probably with a few of the coaches that were on the list. We felt that we had a really strong process. There's lots of coaches that want to coach AIK.
Oh yeah.
Very excited to
We'd like to believe that as supporters, but we don't know for a fact that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, there are some that you'd expect to be excited, that you kind of felt like we talked about before, that you're having to kind of push them
Yeah.
and kind of pull them and impress them. And that didn't make any sense for us. So there was a few that surprised me a little bit on that side. But there were others who had really strong backgrounds, really strong CVs where they were really excited about the project. So yeah, in the end, we had a really good choice, and José was the number one choice from a good group.
Yeah. And going back to style of play, has it changed from the previously when you showed the matrix of where we want to sit, right between direct domination and full control?
Yep.
Are we still in the same place, or have we slightly? Okay, it's identical.
Yeah, because I think we want to be a team that attacks fast, that can, I mean, like the second goal yesterday.
Yeah.
Perfect example, great counter-attack, really incisive, forward quickly, through ball, pull it across the goal, finish, great. I mean, exactly the type of, fast attacking football that we want to see. But at the same time, we're a big club. Teams are going to give us the ball. You can't just say, oh, yeah, we're going to be great in transition. There are going to be times where there is no transition.
Yeah.
They're just going to sit low block. They're going to give us the ball and say, go on then, break us down. You're the big club. What have you got? And so we need to have a team that can keep the ball, that can probe, that can move the ball from left to right, that can, find the gaps rather than just desperately try and get the ball in the box and see what happens. So I think that's why it's kind of in that middle part between full control and between direct domination. It's not a 70% tiki-taka, slow build-up, boring football. It's not that. That's not what we need to be. So that kind of full control zone, we're not going to sit in the bottom right-hand corner of that map as it was shown. But we're also not going to be so direct that everything is launched forward. It needs to be in kind of a mix between the two. So yeah, vertical at times for sure, fast attacking at times for sure, but also with the ability to break teams down. So that's the ideal.
What are the best teams in the world? The Klopp in the second year, the Red Bull teams. What are they doing to play with the pace and the energy, but still be in control of the game?
Well, it's an interesting you bring up the Klopp scenario. I don't want to give away too much because it's I can't remember what the contract says, but the project that we did with the Analytics FC did with Orlando Pirates a long time ago, obviously I'd never met José before this process, so it's not as if I kind of knew him as a person. So it was quite interesting to find out as a person. But obviously we'd done that project a long time ago, and Orlando went with José. He was in the kind of final shortlist, kind of data-wise. So that's exactly the question they asked. They said to us, Mamelodi Sundowns in South Africa is the big team. It's the one with all the cash. They're spending money. They're the ones that obviously qualified for the Club World Cup. They won the African Champions League on a few occasions. They're the Man City. So in that kind of process of breaking down the data, Mamelodi Sundowns were the team with the 70% possession, with that kind of slow build-up, dominating possession. And Orlando said, we want our identity to be that Jurgen Klopp style. We want to be the Liverpool to the Man City of Guardiola. That's what we're trying to find. So in actual fact, that's why José was quite an easy one to pick out in the data, because I already knew where he sat in the map, because I remember that project quite distinctly. So I already knew that he sat perfectly in that slot where Jurgen Klopp had been when he arrived at Liverpool. So interestingly, there is a kind of similarity there to his early time at Liverpool. Strangely enough, Klopp moved more and more and more toward full domination, but that's because teams understood that you don't want to get hit on the transition, you don't want to get hit on the break with Liverpool, so you've got to sit deeper and deeper and deeper against them and defend. So that was kind of natural. So with José, we already knew where he sat within that model. And so, yeah, it's interesting you bring up the Klopp.
But what are those clubs doing? Because it sounds counterintuitive that like playing direct, playing with high pace, maybe higher risk in your passing, and still being able to dominate the game and maintain more possession than your opponents. Obviously, anyone can not anyone. Most good teams can maintain a high possession if you just reduce the risk.
Yeah.
But what are those teams doing to be able to combine the two of them?
I think it's about not being risk averse in the final third. So continuing to try and break a team down, to try and play vertical, and this is the other part of that direct domination part. About the domination part. So being on the right-hand side of that map.
The matrix.
It's basically about dominating in terms of counter press and pressing. So if a team gets possession back, you win it back straight away and you're still in their final third. So the kind of from left to right on that matrix, left being you're giving possession away all the time. On the right, it's that you are dominating a team.
And regaining.
Exactly. So it's being in there, let's say not necessarily the final third, but in the attacking half most of the time. And that's the kind of dominant part. So it doesn't necessarily need to be dominant with the ball. It can be dominant without the ball. But to be right over on that right-hand side in the matrix, you have to be doing both. So that's the bit where I think you don't want to be necessarily dominating all the time with the ball, because like you said, that is a little bit boring. You're in the final third, you're keeping it, nothing's happening. Whereas if you are trying to break a team down and it doesn't work, but then you get it back straight away, that's fine, because at least you're attempting to break teams down. So I think that's probably what those teams do the best. So the teams that are over on that side, whether it's a bit higher up the matrix or a bit lower, it's always teams like, Man City or Real Madrid. They're teams that dominate their leagues. Dinamo Zagreb's another good one. It's teams that really dominate. And whether you do that in possession or out of possession, that's where the kind of ratio changes, I guess.
Yeah, because being direct is just a decision you make when you have the ball, but being dominant is the result of something you do.
Exactly.
It's the outcome.
Exactly. So you could be really dominant, being unbelievably direct, and then just closing a team down in their third. So Red Bull, for example, really direct, really fast attacking, trying to get the ball into the opposition half. But when they lose it, there's suddenly an unbelievable intensity to the counter press, and they regain possession again in the final third. But the build-up was not a slow build-up. So it's really dependent. It's just choices. It's just choices about how to be dominant. Basically.
What was the main issue with dominating in last year for AIK when you made the analysis?
I think very clearly there was a high press which was structured, no doubt about that, and we could low block and we could defend for quite long periods of time without really looking like we were gonna concede. I think our issue really was around the kind of build-up phase. How are we going to build up? In what way? In what structure? And I think it was quite clear that those structures didn't exist or weren't being shown, let's say. And so obviously some of those things take time, but I think some of the things that we were excelling at in the first half of the season were kind of negated by clubs understanding what we were doing and realizing that there wasn't a kind of plan B. So for example, I remember the match against Malmö at home.
Amazing game.
We pressed brilliantly, really well. And Malmö couldn't, I got to be honest, I was quite surprised. Rydström couldn't figure it out.
He couldn't.
And he only figured it out probably in about the 60th or 70th minute, where they started to play over our press. And then suddenly they got a little bit of control in the game. They ended up in our half, and for the last 20 minutes we were defending quite deep. But I remember watching that game thinking, great, we've got a really great weapon here. We've got a high press, which is really well structured. And Mitchell had that really well organized. The problem was that in the second half of the season, every team knew that that's what we did. So they'd play over the press. And then now we've got to defend in a different way. And one of our weapons of high press, nick it, transition had gone.
It's neutralized.
So we're in that position where we need to have the whole package. We need the build-up strategies. We need to know how we're going to attack in different forms. We need the rest defense. We need the press. We need the counter press. It can't just be a couple of those things. It needs to be everything. So that's basically what we assessed.
Because the Malmö game is probably one of the best examples I've seen of a really good team just begging for mercy. Basically. So do you think that we're gonna deviate from that, or is that still the ideal of what we're looking for in terms of dominating the counter press?
I mean, it's obviously a lot of the focus of these training camps has been on the in possession work, because it needs to be added, and you could see that in the last game. Actually, the progression from the Leipzig game to the Toronto game was a really nice big step, which is really positive. But at the same time, I know very well that in the team meetings there's definitely been let's say a reminder, especially after the Leipzig game, that there's defending to do as well. It's not just about this. And I think when you're learning something new for the players, you kind of focus on the thing that's being told to you, and then you kind of forget about the other things. So it's just a learning kind of process. But I think once you get through, match day 3, 4, 5, 6,
Because that was the
both sides.
That was the strongest impression I got of the first camp in Benidorm, was just how Jose focused so much on the passing play, on the shorter distance between the players, but he kept on repeating, guys, also we want to keep the short distances, because if we lose the ball
Because of the counter press. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword in that, or it's actually, there's multiple benefits to playing that kind of football, both with and without the ball, because you're already in the right positions.
Yeah, I think the rule used to be, I remember when I was growing up as a coach, the rule used to be don't coach two things at once, because you'll confuse the players. But actually, this is something where the two things combine. Those shorter distances, playing through spaces, the reason you do it that way is because you can then counter press. So it's like, it is a combination of things that you have to teach, but the players might be focusing on one rather than the other, and
Yeah, and it makes sense that if that was the biggest limiting factor of last year, that's where Jose wants to start. It makes sense that he wants to focus a lot on the passing play and the short distance between the players.
Yeah.
But maybe some people think that, oh, there's going to be an overcorrection now. Now all of a sudden we're going to move to a possession-based team with low risk.
No, and I think that's the biggest thing for us, was we wanted to avoid, and I get that, and maybe just because he's Spanish, you kind of assume that it's going to be high possession, tiki-taka style, right?
Yeah.
But that's not from the evidence, both on video and from the data. That's not what we've witnessed in the past with his teams. They play really fluent football. They're attacking with speed. The transitions are good. The counter pressing is good. The high press is good. So it's not let's say maybe not a traditional Spanish way, but also if we're comparing it to last year, there is a big difference. It's much more in terms of combination play, playing through midfield and these kind of things. So I think the fans will enjoy it.
Yeah. Shifting gears to the transfer window. How do you feel about the transfer window so far?
Kind of an awkward transfer window, really, because obviously from everyone knows about the financial scenarios with the club. I mean, it makes it a little bit difficult to manage the process. And Mika obviously has come into that, and obviously it's been my job to ensure that he knows what the restrictions are, what we can do, what we can't do. And then it's a question of whether you do some deals to get them done quickly and get players into training camps so they're working with the head coach, or to hold off until maybe that there's an outgoing player to allow you to do more with the incoming.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's very clear which positions kind of need to be strengthened. But I feel like the balance of that has been relatively good. We're not going crazy. There's not going to be loads and loads of transfers. So it's more about being stable and then being focused on the areas that need to be improved, but doing that with quite a restricted budget.
So is an example of that you might have the resources to buy a player at a certain level now, but you also know that there's a scenario where you might sell this other player, which would free up resources to go for
yeah, exactly. So I mean, obviously I won't name any names, but there's a 21-year-old player that we know is available, but for a very big transfer fee, or big for us transfer fee, top player, and you think, well, we should invest in that, but we can't. But we could if an outgoing player goes for a good sum. So what do? Do you wait and wait and wait and wait?
Yeah.
Or do you get the player who is much cheaper, who definitely isn't of the same level, but can develop into something quite interesting? But it's a different feeling. One, you're thinking, yeah, it's a good transfer. Potentially could be really good, but yeah. Whereas the other one you're really excited about. And it's like, how much do you take that excitement and go, let's wait for the exciting one? At some point you have to make a decision and say, we need to get a player in now, and we need to get them into camp working with Jose, ready for the season. So that's, luckily, in a way, it's a lot of those kind of decisions and actions are in Mika's hands now. So I can kind of hand that over a little bit and focus on.
Is there frustration within the club that you know what you want to do, but you can't move as fast as you would like?
Yes, but I think that's always going to be the case. So, I mean, the model, I mean, I can talk you through the kind of long-term, medium-term kind of process. And I think all of it, to get to where we want to, you need to invest in players. There's no question about that. No one is giving you young players for free.
Yeah.
Top young players, clubs aren't giving them away for nothing. It just doesn't exist. You might get lucky every now and then, but it really doesn't exist.
So there's an element of you got to spend money to make money.
Exactly. You have to buy contracts. That's the way it is. The problem is, obviously, you need capital to invest in the contracts. So we know that at each stage, whatever level we're looking at, so let's say it's, I don't know, 300,000 euros now. Okay, we can invest 300,000 euros, fine. But when our equity is higher, when we've got more cash reserves, we're going to be looking to invest in players at 500, 600. And when our cash reserves are a little bit higher and we've managed to kind of play a trade our way into having these cash reserves, we're going to want to sell our players for more. So we're going to be able to have the ability to hold on for longer before we sell. And when we do get that money in, we're going to want to be buying for more because we can get higher quality talent with less risk.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be a scenario where we're going to be a little bit frustrated that we don't have all the money in the world.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it's being frustrated at a certain level.
Yep.
And then in the future, we'll be frustrated at that level, and then we'll be frustrated at that level. So, but the kind of overall process is this. Equity is the number one issue. We need to have cash reserves. We need to have money. And to generate that money, as well as that, once you have those cash reserves, let's say you have a top young player, you don't have to sell him at 17 anymore. You can hold on for another season. Or alternatively,
unless you think that that's the ideal time to sell him because he might be overvalued.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe there's some hype around him and you feel like, do you know what?
Yeah.
That's overvaluing our player. Let's take the money. So you're in that position where you're like, okay, let's hold on for another summer. We hold on. We end up selling him for 1.5 million more or whatever, more money than we would have done otherwise. That gives you the patience. When your equity is so low, you don't really have that. Yeah. I mean, you can be really brave and say, we're not going to sell that player. And obviously we have conversations about that internally. It's like, how brave do we want to be in the financial situation that we're in? But basically, the more that you kind of bring in that money into that pot, the more you can be brave and patient and say, okay, let's make our choices. We'll sell this player now, but we'll keep this player. So equity levels go up. By the time those equity levels get to a really decent time, it might be, for example, there might be a window where we think, do you know what? Let's go a bit heavier on investment because we can. Because even if we make a loss this year or a heavy loss, the equity's there, the cash reserves are there. We're just eating into the reserves, but we're not in any danger. So equity is the kind of number one thing that we're looking at the moment. The second part, the kind of medium term, so that's the kind of long term. The medium term is how do we get there? How do we kind of deliver that? And the way that we deliver that is to play our young players, first of all. So I think I've seen a kind of the comments about this particular transfer window and whether we would sign only young players or in the future, is that our aim to only sign young players? It's not that. It's that there has to be enough young players in the group to be confident that there are assets in the group that you can sell. So I think the problem last season was, let's look at playing minutes of players. Taha, so under 21. Okay, Redkin was injured early on, but Taha played minutes. Eric played minutes. And I think Geiger played minutes. And Kevin Filling played, I think, 10% of minutes or 9% of minutes, so not a lot of minutes. So really, in terms of clubs in this window, looking at our young players, unless they really know the Swedish market and they've been watching our youth team for a long time, they basically only know about 4 players. And so the interest in those players is going to be relatively minimal. But okay, you've got some talent that you can sell. Now, for us this season, it's about reworking that in a way where the coach is really comfortable to play young players, to build the minutes, to understand that that's how we're going to progress as a club and not just focus on winning as a kind of business model. So let's say before the business model was winning is everything. Let's qualify for Europe and that it will be fine. We'll get the European money. The problem is if you miss, there's no fallback. So obviously we're trying to win. That's football. We're trying to win games. Obviously we want to qualify for Europe and we want to do that consistently over time, not just in one-off season, get into a group stage and then we're done. We want to be consistently there. But to get there, we have to build that equity so we can invest regularly in really good quality players, supplemented by our academy talent, which has been unbelievable. Obviously the academy does a great job. And so that's the kind of medium term, is we have to play those players. We have to give them game time and they have to be within a structure where the other players are able to help them. So players like Selena, players like Sotta, players like Mads. It's not that we don't want players that are older. It's that they have to be the foundation to give the younger players the space to go and impact.
To make sure there's a certain level of stability.
Yeah, because I mean, let's say Zadok, for example. What are the chances Zadok goes through a 90 minutes without making mistakes, without standing in the wrong place, without forgetting where he should stand on a set piece? These are young players; they make mistakes, right? And so you need that older talent to really be the foundation for them to go and play. So that's the kind of medium-term bit is really giving a foundation for those young players to go and then playing them. They need to be getting 1,500, 2,000 minutes, these young players. And we've got lots of them. And that's the kind of bit that Mika really came in and made quite clear to everyone that we don't actually, right now, we probably don't need to go out and invest that much in young talent. We've got them here. You've got Victor Anderson. You've got, Redkin's injured, but he'll be back. You've got Taha. You've got Zadok. You've got Axel Kwame. There is a lot of young talent in that group. Fredrik Nissen the other day, very good performance.
Wilmer Olsson, Linus Järteg,
Yeah.
a bunch of them.
There's so many. Linus coming into the squad is a really good training camp.
I'm so impressed with him.
Yeah,
I'm so impressed.
Yannick, by the way, had an unbelievable game against Degerfors, playing that 6 role.
Yep.
So all of them are showing what they can do and showing that they could be the one that gets those large number of minutes. Of course, that's up to Jose to assess over the coming weeks. So that's the kind of medium-term bit. And then the short-term bit, which is the bit we're really impressed with when it comes to Jose as well, and one part of the interview process, which we spoke to all the coaches about, is how much are you going to do individually? How much extra? Because we know we've got a good training environment. We know that the staff are intense. They work hard. That's something that was there last year, and I've mentioned on a number of occasions that it's something that Mitchell should be congratulated for in terms of the environment of the training centre. Very, very good. Staff are good. Facilities have been improved in line with what he needed to develop that. But the next stage is really adding more in terms of individual development, really focusing on the younger talent, giving them, for example, I think there was a session this afternoon with the strikers on movements to finish, movements to get into certain areas.
The final exercise they did with Jonny?
Yes, maybe. Yeah. I didn't stay out for the final part, but I knew they were doing.
All the young players participating.
Yeah. So, and this is the part where you're like, great, this is what we need to do. Individualized training, really give these players the platform to go and improve and focus on how do we get each one of them to maximize their talents on the pitch, which then helps us, again, build the asset value of the player, which then helps us build the equity. So it's kind of, that kind of macro, meso, micro view of the way that we do things. So the training environment, the coaching, the individual development of players, that's non-negotiable now. Yeah. That has to happen, and Jose's really big on that side of it. And then that develops your asset value, that develops your equity.
And this is something that I love the way you spell it out, by the way. It's really easy to follow, and you see how the logic, actually, the story checks out, so to speak. But this is something that Fredrik Söderberg has been talking about as well, where he's been talking about, like, for the first time in many years, the whole club, from the board down to the coaches, are aligned with what we need to do. So nobody's trying to deviate and look after their own interests, but this is what we're trying to do together.
Yep. And I think that's taken a little bit of time. And I think my focus when I arrived at the club was, I kind of felt like I'm arriving into a season that's already started. The impact isn't going to be on the kind of structures and processes of the day-to-day working at the training ground and these kind of things. That's already kind of, putting my stamp on that would have been counterproductive. So it was actually more about speaking with Fredrik Wiese, talking about scouting, the processes, how we align all of that, and align with the board. And the question really was, well, what do the board need from us to understand what we're trying to do, and for us to deliver what they have as a vision for us. Yeah. And I think that was the bit that was missing a little bit. There wasn't very good reporting into the board in terms of kind of measuring KPIs, kind of explaining we are doing what we say we do and here's how we measure it. So a lot of the effort and time went into that side of it. And then what's nice about that is that seems to now be in place and everyone kind of understands that. Yeah. Obviously, we're always refining. But it means that I can move slightly more into some of the other areas to support Mika in what he does, and support William as head of operations in what he does, and the different departments, medical, sports science, psychology, and the logistics side of the club as well. So, yeah.
And having that, I feel like, is the insurance against irrational decisions of being short-term and making populist decisions, if you want. Having the reporting up to decision makers on every level, whether things are progressing in the right direction or not.
Yeah, and I think that's the key part now, is getting the structures in place. So it's kind of structure, protocols, making sure that people work in the right way, and then making sure that we measure that, and then that we report that, so everyone knows what we're doing. So it's not a vacuum of information is never good.
Yeah.
People just assume you're not doing stuff if you don't tell people about it.
I agree.
So that was kind of the kind of reporting side, and then making sure that actually people talk to each other on the ground. Because it's quite easy at a football club to work in silos. You're always under pressure to get your work done, so you kind of focus on your work. So basically setting up that kind of meeting structure where we talk a lot about either within departments or together with other departments. So I feel like that's like you say, it's the kind of glue that holds everything together. And let's say I wasn't at the club, but that was left. You'd hope that everything would tick along really nicely. Or if one person leaves, like a head of department leaves, it's no problem. The structure's there. Another head of department comes in. They then get explained to you, this is how we work. This is how we want to do things. Now put your stamp on it.
Yeah.
And off it goes.
It's a machinery.
Yeah, but it's not a new person coming in. And I think I had this discussion with a club in England a long time ago where the academy director had been there for 30 years. And the Premier League had gone in there, and as one of my roles as an auditor, going in and saying to them, look, everyone understands what's happening here. Everyone gets it, but you don't have anything written down. Nothing. There's nothing written down on a bit of paper. There's no kind of reporting. There's nothing. And he said, yeah, but we don't work like that here. And I said, no, I get that. And you work brilliantly. Everything informally is great. My question is, what happens when you leave? And he was like, well, yeah, I don't know, really. When I leave, another guy comes in and has his idea. And well, that's my point. Then everything changes again. So when you leave, it all changes. And so the discussion was around how can you future-proof something? And that's what we want to do here, is future-proof it, so that regardless of head coach, regardless of head of recruitment, regardless of head of strategy, regardless of heads of department, the club runs in a certain way.
Yeah.
And therefore it should all hold.
Yeah, that's there's a similarity between people trying to sell their business. It can't be dependent on the founder or the CEO.
Exactly. The value disappears, right?
Yeah.
Completely. It's like, well, if you don't come with it, what am I buying?
Yeah. Exactly. How do you see, so we talked about the reporting up to the decision makers on every level, all the way up to the board. How do you see the reporting towards the fans to get their continued buy-in, even if things take longer than expected?
Yeah, I think the communication's been quite good so far, I think. I hope that we're trying to be as transparent as we can do. There was a supporters forum a few weeks back talking about the economy of the club and talking about the strategy and how that mixes. Some difficult questions for Fredrik and Håkan to answer on the economy side, and I think they dealt with it really well. And I think the fans were actually really measured and understanding. And I think that's the nice thing, is that because the supporters understand the club so well, they know the situation that we're in, so you can't hide it.
Yeah.
So you might as well just be open and transparent about it and say, look, here's where we are, here's what we're trying to do, and here's the steps we're going to take. The difference, I think, maybe in the past, and obviously I wasn't at the club at the time, but Fredrik kind of says this quite a lot, is the difference in the past is that when we've said, here's our plan, when something goes wrong, we go in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
And I
Pivot.
think, yeah, exactly. I think for us this time, there's just no way we can do it. I don't actually think we can anyway. I think the direction has to be this way because it's the way that we build the club. But at the same time, I think, let's say the results start off not so well for Jose. There's no way we're changing the coach. Okay. I say there's no way we're changing the coach if we lose 10-0 in the first 7 games in a row, then of course.
There might be black swan events.
Yeah.
Other than that.
Yeah. So it's for me, it's really about kind of being true to what we've said we're going to do, being honest about the fact that this is the direction we're in, and then doing it. I hope so far people have seen that we, so far we're delivering on what we say. I think the appointment of Mika lines up really well with what we said we wanted from a kind of a recruitment process and someone who can lead that kind of the football side. And that's his role, by the way, just so everyone's clear, is that the Mika, if you split our roles into two, I think the belief is that having one sporting director is a really difficult task for that person. And so Mika's role is players, contracts, extensions, incoming players, outgoing players, support for the head coach, managing the coaching staff. So everything on the kind of football side, that's Mika. Everything on the other side in terms of all the other departments, structures, processes, the way that we report into the board, the kind of strategy side, that's me. So basically making sure that everyone's doing what we say we do. So that's the kind of split. But yeah, I think you can see that by appointing Mika in that role, by appointing José as the head coach, I think people can see that we really are trying. And we're going to make mistakes, but we're trying to really deliver on what we say we're going to deliver.
The only thing I would add to that is and this is something I've talked about to people in the club and to the listeners as well, is I think there's, over time, we're going to see clubs of various sizes have more of a scalable way of reporting, so to speak, to the fans as well about the progress. Because if we're winning the games, people assume that everything's going in the right direction.
Yeah,
if we're losing the games, people's patience people might not be the most rational 5 minutes after a loss, but if they can see that actually, if we keep our eyes in the horizon, we can see that we're trending in the right direction, we probably should not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. It's something that we've discussed internally, and I think it would obviously have to be, kind of ratified by the board and all this kind of stuff, but having those conversations internally about which KPIs can we present externally?
And what's the format?
Yeah. And say, look, let's be transparent. Here's what, here's our targets. Here's what we believe gets us to, to where we want to be.
Because most of it is not IP anyway, right? It's stuff that most teams already know about. So it's not business secrets.
No, that most of it is, let's say the financial stuff, because of the way that the club's structured and on the stock exchange, everyone sees the finances anyway, on a quarterly basis. In terms of kind of internal things when it comes to kind of hitting targets of, let's say as an example, the medical team and actually it's not the medical team, it'd be the conditioning, strength and conditioning team. The fitness coaches would have a target on player availability. And the kind of standard benchmark of player availability is 85%. So if in any league across the world, really, if you're hitting 85%, you're doing a good job. Obviously, our injury rates have been pretty bad over the years. Victor got injured last year. You had Andreas Redkin. You had injuries to, obviously, Guidetti wasn't on the pitch a lot.
A bunch of them.
Yeah. And so we need to do something about those things, right? We need to set targets, and then we need to put the things in place, the protocols in place to actually make sure that these things don't happen again, or if they're completely random, then fine, those things happen, but we need to know why and make sure we can deal with it. So for me, I think you're right. These aren't secrets.
No, I think perhaps even more important would be if the games are not if it's hard for a layman to see whether we're trending in the right direction or not, some kind of structured data as to whether we're progressing in the right direction would probably buy the club more patience from the fans, because they see that, this is so intuitive. I can totally see that we're heading in the right direction. We should try harder, but we should probably not create a revolution.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, what I found interesting last year was, even when the team were first, second, in third place for a while, the fan reaction or support reaction wasn't quite as positive as you would imagine from a results perspective. It was, well, we might be a little bit lucky to be in that position. And when you looked at, metrics like XG, it was obvious, right? I mean, we were probably being projected to be around. It needs to
get better, or the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah. So it's one of those where, okay, we're projected to be around about 5th or 6th, but the fans kind of felt that. So it's a funny one, because last year there wasn't an overreaction to being high up the table. But at the same time, if we end up being slightly lower, maybe you're right, we have to communicate that we're not. It's no panic. We're doing the right things. We're going to be okay in the long run. So I feel like the supporters have a really good feel for it, but I think reporting regularly back and having a way to do that could really
because
help.
Measuring points is such a crude metric for whether things are working or not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a low resolution metric, basically. And for most of the fans that are coming 90 minutes every 2 weeks to the home games and watching the away games on TV, that's all the data they get, is whether it looks good on the pitch and if we win the game. So it's something I've been arguing, that I think that Hammarby is posting their KPIs on some website, and I don't know if that's not the right format for it, but figuring out a way to like, okay, if we're all aligned within the club, what other stakeholders do we have that matter? Well, we got media and we got like the members, the fans, basically.
Yeah.
And media can say basically whatever they want, but if they have influence and create a narrative that affects the fans and the members, maybe there's going to be decisions made at a meeting that is not aligned with what the club wants to do. So adding it to a risk analysis, I would view it as like, okay, we should probably take this very seriously too. What can we do to go above and beyond to make sure we have the fans on board and the buy-in?
I think that's really fair. And obviously I'd heard about Hammarby kind of presenting their KPIs. I think we can do that, and we probably will at some stage. I think it's just about making sure that everyone's kind of comfortable, aligned. Obviously, with José being here now, there might be a couple of extra KPIs that he feels are really important to measure and to communicate. So, but as soon as we get together and kind of, you know, put that together, I don't think there's any reason not to share that.
No, I don't think so. Unless it's something that is absolutely fundamental and you don't want it to be public, but I don't think there's that much information that is that sensitive anymore.
No.
It's like, before we wrap up, just a few questions from the listeners. I think this one is pretty good from Andis. What specific lessons from your work with the Premier League clubs are you applying to the way AIK operates?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. I would say, as I mentioned before about, it's a little bit of a vague term when I say that we've set up a meeting structure, but I think to give more kind of meat to the bones there, the way that I've seen really good Premier League teams work is they call it multidisciplinary. So the idea is that departments work together and work across each other. So as an example, let's say we're doing, I mentioned before about doing extra individual work with players. If the coaches decide we're going to do a load of individual work with Sixten now on finishing and movements in the box and whatever, great, except they might not have spoken to the sports science department about how much extra he can do as a young player, the load that he needs, it's an extra session. Oh yeah, but it won't be very much, but you haven't spoken to anyone about it. The medical team might be saying, actually, he needs to be doing some of this type of work. The sports psychologist might want a little bit of input. And so basically you get different people working separately.
Yeah.
What I've really seen at the top level is that you've got this multidisciplinary approach. So when we talk about, right, we want to help this player get to this level. Okay, let's analyze what he needs to work on. So for example, you might get an older player like, I don't know, like Dino, for example. He doesn't need extra technical work. The guy knows what he's about as a player. He knows his tactical job. He knows where he should be. But he might want a little bit of work from, you know, the sports psychologist about, you know, how do I, you know, help other players with, you know, leadership? How do I use my influence to do this, to do that? And that helps the team. But if we don't know which players need what, strengths and weaknesses, and then start to break that down across different departments and for them to work together to then deliver that to the player.
I like that.
Then you kind of miss things, or things get done without others knowing, or a player gets overworked when the others would think that that might be an injury risk or whatever. So this kind of multidisciplinary approach is really what we're focusing on in terms of the training center this year, about finding out what the players need, what does every single player need individually, and it'd be very, very different. I mean, it might be one player, for example, it might be purely, they might be having really low energy levels during training and we can't figure out why. And you think it's a fitness problem. It ends up not being a fitness problem, it ends up being a nutrition problem. The guy doesn't eat breakfast, or he doesn't do this, or he eats badly at home, or whatever. All of these things need to be kind of found out and talked about. And if you don't set up a meeting structure where people actually talk to each other,
where the information travels.
Yeah, and I think too often in football, people are really overworked. Let's be honest, it's a really tough environment, and your head is down in your work, and you're like, right, I just need to get my stuff done. And so this way of kind of working multidisciplinary, that's where the real improvements, and you can really kick on.
That makes sense.
And also it shares the burden. That's the other thing is, you know, one person might be thinking, oh, it's me. Like Yonni, for example, being the transition coach, he might think individual development is my role with the younger players and it's on me, and I've got 9 players to work with, 10 players to work with. And you're like, no, we can spread this out. Like you go and do this work with this player. This person will go and do this work with this player. This person's a specialist in this. They'll go and do this work. And you can kind of spread that load as well. So it makes it easier as well, I think, for staff.
Yeah, that's for sure. From the same listener on this, what are you most satisfied with having implemented so far, and what do you see the most critical focus areas over the next 6 months?
I think that one is the most critical, because as we mentioned before, that individual development and that kind of extra work with players and really getting the training ground to buzz in that sense then builds into the player value and builds into the equity. So I think that really is the biggest one. Makes sense. Because you can impact that. It's not like if you said, oh, we need to raise the value of our players. Okay, fine, but there's a lot of influence there from the market. The player has to play minutes and be on the pitch, and there could be, kind of injuries and these kind of things. But you can impact the way that you help a player every single day. Exactly, yeah. So I think control the controllables as much as you possibly can. I think that's one of them. What was the first part of the question? There was a...
so what are you the most satisfied with implemented so far?
I think probably that clear reporting structure through to the board. I think what we do now when it comes to a player acquisition, for example, is there's a report that goes with that, and that report covers everything. It covers obviously the scouting reports of the player, the data for the player, the return on investment kind of projection for the player. It has all of the information that you would need to make a really clean and clear decision about, does this fit with our strategy? Does it fit into the game model? And also within that report, there are questions that get asked about, is everyone aligned? What does the head coach think? What does the head of medical think? What does the head of sports science think? So there's never and I know, for example, in the past, there are players that were signed with pretty questionable medical history, for example.
We all know that.
And so these things can get missed, but within that kind of dossier, everything is considered. So when it gets presented to the board, there's very few questions, because they'll have read through the documentation, and it's like, well, the only question really is it within strategy? And can we afford it, basically? And so, whereas before, I think there were lots and lots of questions. And it's like, well, have we looked at this, and have we investigated this, and do we know about his injury history, and it I don't know, it raises questions. So I think being as aligned as possible and being able to answer people's questions before they ask them, I think that's the bit where I think we've ended up with a really clean, clear process. So I think that's worked really well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last question from listener Marcus. It would be interesting to hear more specifically about the data behind the players being recruited, which football aspects are ranked highest per position, etc. I'm assuming this is getting closer to what is actually secret, but can you talk in a general sense of what specifically about the data behind the players being recruited are you guys looking at?
Obviously, each player or each position has its own profile. So we, in a general sense, the algorithms that we use in terms of being able to assess players are based on let me explain this from the start. So there's an algorithm called goal difference added within the transfer lab model that we use to recruit players.
Yeah.
Now, that model basically looks at what's the probability of the team being the next team to score or the next team to concede, and what's the change after a certain action has happened. So if I play a through ball, how much more likely are we to score after that through ball than before? It's
equivalent to if you have a positive or negative expected value after everything you do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in a general sense, we're looking for players that add positive expected value. That's the idea, is if a player is helping the team to either progress the ball up the pitch, score a goal, create a goal, or alternatively preventing other teams from doing so, that's in a general sense what we're looking for. Because I think too often you can find players that look good on a pitch but have zero impact. And so for us, it's about players that actually have an impact on the game, either in this direction or that direction. So that's kind of stage one. The second part is breaking that down into our positional profiles. They will be adjusted slightly with Jose, but not by a lot, because the whole point of bringing a head coach that aligns with our way of doing things and our style of play is that all of our positional profiles, all of our kind of way of doing things remain the same.
Yeah.
And then all we're doing is plugging in, a new coach into that and providing them with the players that they require to deliver that style. But you always have to be conscious that different coaches do things in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
Maybe slightly different positions as well on the pitch. So, for example, you might get a head coach that plays 4-3-3, but is that 4-1-2-3 or is it 4-2-1-3?
Exactly.
So obviously we have to just be aware of that and adjust and be slightly flexible. But, for example, you don't want to go from having positional profiles that deal with players that, are direct and long ball to then moving to, comfortable in possession. So what we're looking for is, I can't be specific about each position necessarily. Well, I probably could, but it's probably pretty obvious. But for a striker, for example, can they be in goal scoring positions regularly? Can they, funnily enough, I mean, about expected goals and about those kind of metrics. So actually, the finishing part is important, knowing they can finish. But if they haven't been finishing, but their expected goals numbers are very, very high and they get into good goal scoring positions regularly, you might well find an undervalued talent there. So it's not necessarily that they need to have been scoring goals, but they need to be able to score goals.
Yeah.
But for each position, the characteristics are relatively obvious, but then there are specific details that we want to focus on when it comes to the video. So data first always, but in terms of filtering down, because I mean, a club like this, the market is quite big.
Yeah.
But then in terms of the video, then it starts to get into really kind of specific detail. And then you're into the background of the character of the player and where they've been and what they've done and what their impact in the dressing room is. And so all of that always becomes important.
I guess a good place to end is actually what we talked about before we started recording, which I think is interesting. And I would like for you to share that with the listeners as well, which is looking for undervalued assets as well, undervalued players. Like, what can you look for in the data that makes this player look like he's actually not that good of a deal, but that has to do more with the context and the coach that he worked on and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so that was an interesting one. So one example from last year was that we were looking for a central defender, and it was a younger kind of profile. He'd been at a big club in their B team, and you would expect that player to be good in possession, to be able to play through lines, to be able to switch play well, and his numbers reflected that. Then he gets bought by another club and goes on loan, and he goes on loan to a team in Austria, and that team was basically the most long ball team in Europe. And you're thinking, okay, fine. And suddenly his passing numbers are shocking. But obviously we know he can do it, because he was doing it for his previous club. So I think there is an element of, for example, if you take the two models that the supporters that will have listened to the pod before will know about, there's the model around Transfer Lab, the one we just described, and then there's the Coach ID model where we're using that data to filter head coaches.
Yep.
You can actually kind of overlay those two together. You can say, well, okay, let's look for clubs who have a coach that has a history of playing direct, but let's find players who in the past have been able to play football.
Yeah, because now it's disguised.
Yeah, now it's disguised, and it's almost impossible for other clubs to uncover that player can do that. So let's say at his current club, he's still winning headers, he's still winning tackles, he's still great in 1v1s, but his passing numbers look terrible. A lot of clubs will just go, he can't play. That's not the one for us. We need a guy that can at least, play a little bit. And then we go, well, actually, we know why. We know that there might be an uncovered, like you say, a hidden player here or at that club or at that club or at that club. Let's go and investigate those teams and see whether we can find those players. Yeah. And then, of course, their numbers would be, we could then uncover that undervalued talent. In a way, there is an element of that working the reverse for us last year, where we were a bit more direct. And so, for example, there are players who might not have shown up well in the data, and therefore other clubs might not be interested to talk to us about buying our players because of that. Yeah. So there's a little bit of a kind of double-edged sword of our own style of play and development. And again, that's another reason why the style is focused where it is, and why Jose was the right coach for us, because again, we need to be attractive to other clubs. And if we say purely on formation, playing 4-3-3 as an example, you've got two wide players, you've got a striker and a number 10. So you've got four players there immediately who are already, should be, if they're doing their job, attracting attention. Whereas in the previous formation that we did last year, a 3-4-2-1, you've basically got two 10s and a striker. Yeah. And you're kind of and they're both obviously narrow, so they're not in wide areas, going 1v1 and beating players. So you're actually kind of reducing your ability to then go to the market and for people to be interested in your talent. So again, it's not necessarily about formations. I'm sure Jose will adjust as he needs to during the year and be flexible, but it does make a difference to the rest of the kind of business model of the club.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I like that part of trying to find undervalued assets. Fredrik Lisa Hansen was talking about it before he left, that we need to punch above our weight.
Yeah.
And that's an example of using data and a sophisticated way of working to try to punch above your weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jeremy, thanks so much for joining, and welcome back anytime.
Thanks for having me.